Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. My name is Ren Smith. I'm an organizer with Sierra Club. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for the human cost of Colorado's last 3 coal plants. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes to let any stragglers get a chance to log on. All right, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. It's a couple minutes after the hour now. For those of us just joining, hi again. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ren Smith. I'm a community organizer with Sierra Club, and I'm so excited to welcome you all to our presentation, The Human Cost of Colorado's Last 3 Coal Plants. So I'm going to go ahead and run through the agenda real quick. First, I want to make everyone aware that we will be recording this presentation for viewing in the future. So if you would prefer to not be recorded, you can always choose to keep your camera off for the presentation. Your mic will be muted throughout the webinar, and if you have any questions, you can submit them in the questions pane on the right side. So tonight we'll be discussing the health impacts of Xcel Energy's coal plants on the communities nearby, the economic impracticability of coal and how much we can save by switching to renewable energy sources, and finally, the role these coal plants play in the climate crisis. This is really important because Xcel Energy currently powers about 60% of our state with electricity, and it's the only utility left in Colorado with coal power not already scheduled for retirement by 2030. So while Xcel has committed to 80% CO2 reductions by 2030 for the sake of our health, our wallets, and our climate, we need Xcel to retire all of its coal plants by 2030 at the very latest. This is why Xcel Energy has become the focus of my organizing and that of many other local activists, and why I'm so excited that you're here tonight to learn more and help out. So this webinar will be about 1 hour. We have 3 speakers tonight who I'll introduce in a sec. And then there will be an opportunity for you to take action and help us move Xcel towards clean energy, followed by a Q&A session. So like I said, feel free to submit questions in the questions pane in the control panel on the right. You can submit questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If you'd like to address your question to a specific panelist, please indicate that. And I'll be reading the questions out loud during the Q&A session for a panelist to respond. Q&A should wrap up at about 8 p.m., but we can also stay on the line an additional few minutes to take extra questions that you may have. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. So first we have Jamie Valdez. Jamie is a multicultural native of Pueblo, Colorado, and a parent and grandparent. His educational background is in electronics, engineering, technology, and psychology, and his work history is mostly in the field of electronics. He's currently employed as a community support organizer for We Own It and as a community team coordinator for Mothers Out Front. Jamie began his clean energy work in 2016 as a volunteer digital organizer with the Pueblo Ready for 100 team, and has since expanded his roles and the scope of his work. He currently serves as chair of the Sangre de Cristo group of the Sierra Club and the Fountain Creek Water Sentinels, and is a member of the Colorado Sierra Club Executive Committee. His activist background is primarily in equity and justice movements, and therefore energy justice and environmental justice are two of his passions, and he approaches all his work with an eye on equity, justice, and inclusivity. And next we'll have Anna McDevitt. She's the senior campaign representative for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign in Colorado and New Mexico. For the last 3 years with the Beyond Coal campaign, her work is focused on a just and fair transition from coal to clean energy in Colorado by 2030 at the latest, with a particular focus on Colorado Springs utilities and tri-state generation and transmission. Before coming to Sierra Club, Anna worked on garnering Colorado support for the EPA's original Clean Power Plan with Environment America, running Get Out the Vote election offices and working on anti-pipeline and divestment campaigns in Minnesota and the Northeast. And our last speaker is Amy Gray, a former organizer at 350.org and current volunteer and JEDI coordinator at 350 Colorado and mobilization specialist at Stop the Money Pipeline. Amy is an expert in organizing mass mobilizations and forming diverse coalitions. Amy has been a longtime supporter of 350 campaigns and began her journey into activism fighting the Xcel pipeline and Dakota Access Pipeline. As volunteer and JEDI director at 350 Colorado, Amy has helped to start new teams, train and empower volunteers, and engage new members statewide. She also oversees the Moving Beyond Coal campaign and justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work as a trainer in anti-oppression and intersectional climate justice organizing. She is also on the board of directors for 350 Colorado Action and the Chinook Center. And then we're also joined by Liana Epstein, a volunteer for the Denver Beyond Coal team, who will be helping me out with a quick call to action at the end of this, at the end of our presentation, so that you can learn more about how to help out. Cool. So with that, I'll go ahead and toss it to Jamie Valdez.
Thank you, Ren. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to talk to you tonight about the health toll of Xcel's Comanche coal plant. I live here in Pueblo, Colorado, and this is where Comanche's coal plant, or Xcel's Comanche coal plant, is located. It's one of the last remaining coal-fired plants in Colorado. And yeah, so let's go ahead and, oh, by the way, this is a picture that I took. This is taken just right down the street from my house at the first cross street. And you can see there in the background is Xcel's Comanche power plant spewing toxic pollutants into the air that we have to breathe. That's just about 5 miles away from my house. Let's go ahead and jump into the next slide. So as previously mentioned, my name is Jamie Valdez. I'm a community team coordinator for Mothers Out Front, community support organizer for We Own It. Mothers Out Front is an organization that works, while it's an organization made up of women, mothers, and other caregivers, and we work to empower others like us to be able to participate in the climate activism and be involved in the issues that impact their lives on a regular basis. With We Own It, we work to empower cooperative organizing models and business models, such as rural electric cooperatives and credit unions and so forth. And I'm also the chair of Sierra Club's Sangre de Cristo group in Pueblo, Colorado. And I really enjoy my work with all of these organizations. Once again, I do live in Pueblo, Colorado, and I grew up with a single mother raising me while trying to finish school and working full time. So I was instilled early on with a very deep respect for and admiration for strong women, and I have come to a place a long time ago where I feel like their issues are my issues. I also am multicultural, as was mentioned in my introduction. I have a mixture of German and Spanish and Irish and Native American and Native Mexican, which to me, Native Mexicans are Native Americans. But, at a young age, 7 years old, 8 years old, my mom married into a Black family. So those people became my family at that point too, and they still are. My cousins on that side of my family are every bit my cousins as much as my cousins on my, my blood relatives, my aunts, uncles, etc. And within both sides of my family, I've got people from various different identities with the LGBTQ plus communities, and so these environmental justice and environmental racism issues are extremely important to me, and at a very personal level. So environmental racism refers to the way in which minority neighborhoods populated primarily by people of color and low-income people are burdened with a disproportionate number of hazards. There are many ways environmental racism can manifest. It can look like housing an area housing a number of dangerous, unsightly, or polluting facilities, including polluting power plants, garbage and toxic waste dumps, underfunded schools with old infrastructure that contain harmful toxins such as asbestos and other sources of environmental pollution that harm public health and lower the quality of life. And this is very specific to us here in Pueblo. We just recently had a battle where we had to jump into action and activate the local activist community to save two of our schools that were being proposed to be shut down, one of which I know had problems with asbestos, and there was no proposal to replace them. They just wanted to go from being a city of 4 high schools to a city of 2 high schools, and imagine how overpopulated that would have made our classrooms. It just wasn't a solution, and so thankfully we did urge our city, our district leaders to come up with a better plan that replaces the 2 schools. And so, yeah, that's very much, once again, deeply personal to me. All around the globe, people of color bear a greater burden of the health problems that result from higher exposure to waste and pollution. This can occur due to unsafe or unhealthy work conditions where regulations are not enforced for poor workers, or in neighborhoods that are close to polluting sites like fossil fuel power plants, which release toxic materials. Comanche is one of Xcel's 3 remaining coal plants, as I mentioned earlier, and sits in a majority Latinx community here in Pueblo, where I live. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is a picture I took from my front porch. This is the view that I see every day when I walk out my front door, or even just look out my front door. You can see there, you see the front of my neighbor's house directly across the street from me, and their garage off to the side. And kind of right in between there, you see the smokestacks from Comanche plant spewing those toxic pollutants into the air that I and my family and community have to breathe. Communities like ours, located near coal-fired plants, face increased risks of respiratory disease, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, and other health problems, as well as higher death rates at earlier ages. This speaks to me, again, on a personal level, and I'll get a little more into that shortly. All of the energy from Comanche goes to Denver metro area, so people here in Pueblo are left with all of the pollution and none of the energy. Comanche is also a huge water consumer. It's the largest in Pueblo County, and Pueblo County is a very sizable county. Right now, Comanche 3 is not expected to retire until 2070, continuing this legacy for decades. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So here on this slide, you see 2 charts and a map. On the map there, if you take a look, hopefully you can see it clearly enough to make out where it says Salt Creek, and then just a little up and to the right of that, it says Blend. I live just about 2 miles north of there on that map. So I'm just outside that little area right there included in the map. The very first chart you see there on the left is the at-risk population. This is from the Clean Air Task Force's toll from coal report, and it shows the at-risk population from Xcel's Comanche coal plant here in Pueblo. And it's broken down into two categories based on distance from the plant. You'll see there within 12 miles, there's about 130,000 population of about 131,000. That is about Pueblo's entire population, because at its very longest points, Pueblo is only about 11 miles. So that 12 miles pretty much encompasses, that 12-mile radius pretty much encompasses all of Pueblo. You see there that there are 39, nearly 40,000, or 36,000, nearly 36,000 children living within that radius. The most important numbers on that chart, though, are down at the bottom. You'll see people of color. Within 3 miles, 52% of the population are people of color versus the state average of 30% of the state population are people of color. Within 12 miles, the people of color make up 50% of the population versus, again, 30 for the state. The one below that, poverty rate within 3 miles is 20% versus the state average of 13%. And at 12 miles, it's 22% versus that same state average. In the next chart, you can take a look at all the numbers, but the main ones to keep in mind there are sulfur dioxide, nearly 4,000 tons per year being released by Comanche into the air that we breathe here in Pueblo. Nitric oxides, those are various oxides of nitrogen, make up 4,600 tons per year, or are released at a rate of 4,600 tons per year. And the most staggering one, carbon dioxide emissions, 9,653,188 tons per year. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So here we see the health impacts of coal-fired power plants. They affect the lungs. They have multiple effects on the blood, the brain, the heart, and the vasculature. Many of these, especially like the heart, the blood, and the vasculature, work in concert with each other, and therefore problems with one can exacerbate problem with another, and vice versa. So again, I wanted to point out some personal some things that kind of jump out to me on a personal level. First of all, some statistics here in Pueblo County versus the state. For coronary artery disease, the state average is 2.9% of adults have been diagnosed with coronary artery disease, versus here in Pueblo, 3.7% of adults have been diagnosed. That's nearly 1 full percentage point higher than the state average. For chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, the state average is 4.4% have been diagnosed, of adults have been diagnosed, versus here in Pueblo, the average is 9.9% of adults. That's a full 5.5% higher than the state average. That's definitely significant, and it's very concerning for those of us who live here. And for me, all of these effects involving the heart and the heart attack numbers and things like that jump out at me like huge red flags, because I have history of heart problems in my family. My uncle had a heart attack at 30 years old, and then it ended up dying of a heart attack just before he turned 60. And my grandpa died at 57 of a heart attack. And so when I see these numbers, the statistics for my family bear those numbers out. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So the health impacts for certain conditions, specifically from Comanche here in Pueblo, per year, there are 12 deaths, 3 hospital admissions, 4 asthma ER visits, 7 heart attacks. Once again, there's that red flag jumping out at me. Chronic bronchitis, 3 cases per year. Asthma attacks, 92. Work loss days, 673. again, this is very significant, and the costs that come from those impacts, the financial costs to those people and to the community are great. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. So as I get wrapped up, I don't want to leave you with just gloom and doom. So here's some hope for the future. Pueblo is poised to be a leader in renewable energy. We live in a high plains desert with more than 300 days of sunshine per year, positioning us in a perfect spot to be a leader in solar energy. We have plenty of wind whipping around the plains. You can see there on the left, I took that picture from atop the 8th Street Bridge looking down onto the railroad tracks that cross below the bridge. You can see those are wind turbine blades being hauled by railway. So as we shift away from coal, those kind of parts for wind turbines and other renewable sources can kind of take the place of those coal cars that will hopefully no longer be running up and down our railways and through our communities. And by the way, just on the other side of those tracks is the Fountain Creek. Coal cars tend to lose about 3% of their load just from coal dust escaping from rattling and wind and other factors. And once again, we have our Fountain Creek running right along those tracks, collecting that coal dust as it settles from the air. In Colorado Springs, we have Drake power plant sitting literally on the banks of the Fountain Creek. Once again, though, here in Pueblo, we have one of the largest solar arrays in the country. In that picture on the right, you can see right next to Xcel's Comanche plant, there's a large solar array there. Again, that's one of the largest in the country. And although none of the energy from Comanche serves Pueblo, it does give us hope for what the future may look like. We also have one of the largest wind turbine manufacturing plants in the country at Vestas. And you see there in the middle is the large wind turbine that stands unmistakably just south of town, right almost next door to Comanche Power Plant. We have a large dam with 5 outlets, only one of which has been fitted with a hydroelectric turbine. And we have a Bighorn solar project scheduled to begin soon that will be powering our local Evraz steel mill here in Pueblo. And what that will do is show that large-scale manufacturing plants like that can be powered by 100% solar. So again, we've got a lot of hope for the future. And before we finish up here, I skipped over where the slide was. We have a video. Do we have time to show the video still? This video was made a few years ago, I believe, and it was 2017. But it talks about a lot of the things I've talked about, and again, the hope for the future. So again, that was our Pueblo is ready for 100% clean energy video that we made a few years ago. And we really hope that Xcel Energy and others will start to make that transition. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, for taking this time out of your evening to come and hear us talk about these issues. You can feel free to reach out to me at jamie.valdez@mothersoutfront.org. And please, I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar and have a good evening, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing your story and for that great presentation. Cool. So now I'll go ahead and pass it over to Anna.
Great. Hey, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me okay. If you can't, just make a note in the chat and we will figure it out on our end. But I'm excited to talk a little bit about, well, actually, I want to make sure you see my title, which is that Xcel's coal just doesn't make sense. If you know me, you know that a good pun is the way to my heart. So I had to share that with you. And then I want to share a little bit more about myself as well. So I'm the senior campaign representative for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign. I work in Colorado and New Mexico, but honestly, a lot of my work is in Colorado these days. There is just a lot going on. And now Colorado is at the point where we only have 3 coal plants that will burn coal past 2030. So we're definitely going all out to make sure that that's not the case. Ren did a great job sharing a little bit more about myself earlier, so I'll skip over that and just quickly share a fun fact with you, which is that my first campaign was actually living off of my bike and biking along the route of a proposed pipeline in the Northeast. So I was mostly in Vermont and New Hampshire with a small team of folks, and we were biking along the route of that pipeline and having meetings in communities and raising awareness about the impacts of a dirty tar sands pipeline going through the northeastern part of our country. So if you like biking and climate campaigning, hit me up and I'd love to talk with you more about it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple things here. So first, I want to share a lay of the land of the coal situation in Colorado, where other utilities are, how Xcel compares, that kind of thing. And then I'll share a little bit more about the economics of Xcel's coal based on the latest report that we have. And I've got a couple of options for dealing with those issues that I want to share with this group as we kind of tackle the climate problem here in Colorado. So starting with a map of the coal plants that I'm thinking about here, this is a map of the coal plants and coal mines that we have in Colorado still. Colorado is a historically extractive state, okay? So we've got a lot of mines, we've got a lot of coal plants. The blue ones are the mines there, and the red ones are the coal plants. And this map is from our new Colorado Office of Just Transition, by the way. And when I'm thinking about coal in our state these days, I'm really thinking about these 3 that I've highlighted now, which are all owned by Xcel Energy. And these are the 3 that I mentioned that will be burning coal past 2030. And so just for a little bit of context about where some of these are, so Hayden 1 and 2, that's actually one of the most expensive coal plants in the state. And it's located just north, I guess it'd be northwest of Steamboat Springs, if you're familiar with that area. And then over here on the furthest right, we've got the Pawnee coal plant. That's in the Brush and Fort Morgan area. And then at the bottom here, we've got Comanche 3. Comanche 3 is the coal plant that Jamie just showed y'all a ton of photos of. There's actually 3 coal units in Pueblo, but 2 of them were announced for retirement a couple of years ago and will retire before 2030. Comanche 3 is slated to retire in 2070, which just blows my mind, but you heard it right, 2070. So we have 50 more years of this coal plant unless we can convince Xcel to retire it through people power, through just the pure economics of coal, and of course, through any sort of state regulation. So our movement is working. I'll start there. People power is working. We are retiring coal all across Colorado. People power is definitely at the core of why that's happening, but we can't deny the benefits of obviously a changing energy economy, as well as some of the state policies that have been put into place. But I do want to point out that neither of those things would happen without people like you that are on this webinar learning more and learning how to get involved to push our utilities to do what we want them to. This photo actually was taken about, I guess it was about a year and a half ago now, in front of the Drake coal plant, which was just announced for retirement before 2030 and actually probably in the next couple of years, just this past June. And then here's a couple of other headlines that have happened in our state this year. 2020 has been a huge, huge, huge year for coal retirement announcements in our state. So I'll actually start in the middle here with Tri-State. So we have 4 main, like, huge utilities in our state. So Xcel is the biggest. They power 60% of our state. Next, we have Tri-State. They power about 70% of our state geographically, but probably closer to about 30% of the actual people in Colorado. And that's because Tri-State serves a lot of rural Colorado communities. But back in January, they announced the retirement of all their Colorado and New Mexico coal plants, which was a big deal. Tri-State has a lot of coal, and that was an announcement retiring about half of it. The other half is out of state, but a lot of it does get routed into our state. So we do have Coloradans that are receiving coal power from southern Wyoming and from eastern Arizona. Next, Platte River Power Authority made an announcement. So June was a big month. Platte River Power Authority powers Fort Collins in that area, and they announced that they're going to retire their Rawhide coal plant by 2030. So they'll be coal-free by 2030. And then I mentioned Colorado Springs is going to retire 2 of its coal plants. So one, the Drake coal plant, that's the last downtown coal plant that exists in Colorado. And then they're also going to retire their Nixon coal plant by 2030. And so another way that we talk about the progress that utilities are making in Colorado is talking about their carbon reductions. So obviously a lot of the utilities are doing great things by actually retiring coal units. Xcel, though, is the only one that hasn't made any coal announcements this year. But the other way we talk about them is carbon reductions. And so I just wanted to kind of paint a lay of the land of what utilities are committed to in Colorado. And I actually had to do, you can see my very professional, kind of editing skills here on the right. This is an old graphic that is not up to date. We used this on the campaign to retire the Colorado Springs utility, the coal commitments that they made at the time. So just earlier this spring, Colorado Springs was only on track for 40% carbon reductions by 2035. And that was at a time when every other utility in the state had committed to at least 70% carbon reductions for the electricity that's delivered to Colorado customers. So that was kind of a big deal. But Colorado Springs definitely stepped up to the plate and in many ways is leading on a clean energy transition at this point. And so I tried to reflect that with my little edits there. But anyway, now you can see Tri-State's actually kind of falling behind on the carbon reduction plans now. They committed to 70% carbon reductions for electricity delivered to Colorado customers just earlier this year. So we're gonna have to do some work to push them a little bit more. And then Xcel, of course, is already committed to 80% carbon reductions, but they still have those 3 coal plants that they have no plans to retire. So there's still a lot of work to do there as well. So to talk a little bit more about why Xcel's coal doesn't make sense, last year, so 2019, in the summer, Stratogen, a independent consultant company, did a study to look at the cost of Colorado's coal plants. And this was a very basic analysis, okay? So basically what this report did was it looked at the operating costs of the coal plants that were in Colorado that at the time didn't have retirement dates. And they compared that with what the cost of wind would be in that area and with what the cost of solar would be in that area. So obviously it's not perfect, right? Because what we're going to ultimately replace coal plants with is a mix of wind and solar and battery storage and probably a lot of other technologies that exist or are coming to us soon. But it does give you an idea that solar is cheaper than coal in these parts of our state. Hint, it's all parts of our state, and that wind is cheaper than coal in all parts of our state as well. And so what we found for Xcel Energy in particular is that if they retired their coal plants that at the time weren't announced, and many of them still aren't, they could save $187 million for customers just by replacing those coal plants with solar. On the other hand, if they were to replace those coal plants with just wind, they could save customers about $360 million. And so that gives you an idea of what kind of savings are in the mix here when we talk about retiring coal and replacing it with clean energy, like so many utilities are doing across the country. And so to kind of draw a picture of what that looks like, I wanted to share this, this slide here. This slide, there we go. And I starred the Xcel coal plants that we're focusing on tonight, which are, again, that Pawnee coal plant, Comanche 3, and then the Hayden coal plant. Hayden has 2 units or 2 smokestacks, so that's why there's 2 Hayden coal plants there. And this, basically a way to think about this graph is it is just the cost of energy for coal plants across the state. All the blue ones are owned by Xcel, the green ones are owned by other utilities. But you can see which coal plant has the cheapest operating costs and which one has the most expensive. And Hayden is definitely up there. You can also see on this graph the orange and blue lines, which show you what the cost of solar or wind in those areas are. And so while there's a ton of savings for retiring Hayden and replacing it, there's not as much savings for retiring Comanche 3 and Pawnee, but there definitely are savings. And so when you start to account for the climate benefits on top of that, as well as the health benefits for some of the things that Jamie talked about earlier, it just totally makes sense to start retiring the last of these coal plants. So the other thing that I wanted to share is the cost of carbon. So of course we can talk about costs like how much money are we paying on our electricity bills, right? But there are other costs that go into the issue of burning coal. And one of those is the social cost of carbon. So if you've never heard of the social cost of carbon before, basically under the Obama administration, an interagency working group came together and tried to put a number on how much climate change costs us per ton of carbon emitted. And the number that they came to, which is a very conservative number, by the way, is $47 per short ton. That's how much it costs us when climate change happens. And so that's things like sidewalks cracking, right? And we have to replace them because of heat. It's things like infrastructure updates that have to happen because we have more frequent severe weather events. You know, the flood in Colorado in 2013 is a great example of that. That cost us a lot of money, as well as the largest hailstorm that ever happened in Colorado back in May 2018 that hit the Lakewood area pretty darn hard. Those are really expensive, and we have a number for how much they're costing us. And so we use that 47, or I guess strategy, and use that 47% or $47 per short ton number to look at how much each of these coal plants are costing us. And for Xcel's coal plants alone, replacing those coal plants with solar and accounting for the social cost of carbon as well means that we'd actually be saving closer to $7 billion. And then for wind, it's $7.3 billion. And so you just can't argue with those numbers. But the one thing I wanted to point out is that the social cost of carbon is not a perfect assessment of the health costs that come with burning carbon as well. There are some health costs that are accounted for in the social cost of carbon. I don't know which ones they do consider off the top of my head, but it's not a complete analysis of that. And so I did want to share this testimony from a recent hearing. This happened at, let's see, I put it on here, the House Committee. It was a hearing at the House Committee on Oversight and Reform by Drew Schindel, who is a professor of earth science over at Duke University. And he kind of painted a picture of what some of the health impacts of coal are. And I know Jamie did a great job of that earlier as well. And on a global scale, there's 4.5 million premature deaths that will happen, 3.5 million hospitalizations and emergency room visits, and about 300 million lost work days over the next 50 years if we don't start to take some serious action on climate change. And I know that Amy Gray is gonna dig into that a little bit more next here. But I don't have the numbers on hand for what that would cost right now, but we're looking at a lot of money there. So again, lots of savings associated with retiring coal plants and replacing them with clean energy. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of things to be thinking about, if this is something that you decide you really care about, right? Yes, we do need to be retiring the coal plants. What can we be doing to make that possible? And one of the things the Stratogen report, so the same report that we were just talking about, found last summer is that there are additional savings for ratepayers if Xcel Energy were to use a financial tool called securitization to retire its coal plants and replace them with clean energy. So specifically, they found that Xcel could save customers about $467 million by using this particular financial tool to do this kind of coal retirement. And that number is not going to be perfect. Xcel, or the Public Utilities Commission, is going to need to really work out what that looks like. But I think this just shows that is a tool that we should be putting on the table and taking seriously as an option here. And basically what securitization is it's a tool for refinancing coal debt. Coal plants are crazy expensive to operate, to maintain, to fix, you name it. And so there's a lot of coal debt that a lot of utilities have that you and I are paying for in our electricity bills. That is kind of in the way when it comes to utilities having the capital needed on hand to invest in clean energy. And so securitization, the way that I kind of think about it is it ends up being kind of a win-win for everybody. So when a utility like Xcel securitizes its coal debt on the coal plants that are left in Colorado, they see savings because basically with that refinancing, they have a lower interest rate, which means savings for the utility. But because the utility is saving money, you and I are also saving money too, because we're not having to pay for that coal debt over time. So it's a little bit of a win-win there. And then some states have gone a step further, and Colorado is one that has considered this, to make it so that a portion of those savings from retiring those coal plants and refinancing them is allocated to worker transition and community transition, which at this point, I think we need all the tools that we can get to really facilitate that transition in a way that's fair, in a way that's just for the workers and the communities that are impacted. I think of Pueblo when I think of a community that's impacted. And then, you saw that map of all the coal mines and coal plants in the state. There's about probably just under 2,000 coal jobs in the state of Colorado. About 800 of those are in mines, and close to 1,000 of them are in the coal plants themselves. So we definitely need solutions there. And then the other thing that you can do is join us in this fight. So I love this picture. This is a picture of some of the members of our Denver Beyond Coal team. And they are taking this picture right after having testified at the Public Utilities Commission. I guess this was probably last year. So you can see the kind of PUC little emblem there. And the Public Utilities Commission's job is to make sure that Coloradans like you and I have access to affordable and reliable electricity. And so it's their job to listen to us when we feel like we're not getting affordable and reliable electricity, and where we want our electricity to come from. So there's gonna be lots of opportunities over the next year or so to engage and to advocate and to campaign at the Public Utilities Commission. And I encourage you all to be a part of that with us, that we can get Xcel to retire those last 3 coal plants. So again, my name's Anna McDevitt. If y'all want to get in touch with me at all, here's my email address. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat. And then I do have a quick action that you can take right now before we hear from Amy. So I've added my Twitter handle on here. Go check it out. Right before the webinar started, I tweeted a little something at Xcel Energy, as well as the link to a letter that we are trying to get as many people to sign as possible. If you could A, sign that letter, and B, retweet that tweet or share some form of it the way you'd like to, please do, because the more we have in our movement with us on this, the merrier, and we'll really get the job done. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Cool, so next we will have Amy.
Hello. All right, so I'm going to talk about coal and House Bill 1261 and some climate impacts related to coal. Again, my name's Amy. I'm the Volunteer and Jedi Director at 350 Colorado and the lead campaigner for Moving Beyond Coal on behalf of 350 Colorado. And I just have to say that I've been working with Anna for years, and being on this team fighting to shut down coal plants is my favorite campaign by far. And we're gonna get these shut down. It's gonna happen. Next slide. Go ahead. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the climate impacts of coal. I know everybody hears a lot of things, what contributes to it, what is it, but climate change is it's the most serious long-term global impact. Chemically, coal is mostly carbon, which when burned reacts with oxygen in the air to produce carbon dioxide, a heat-trapping gas. When released into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide works like a blanket, warming the Earth above normal limits. It is also the single biggest contributor to anthropogenic climate change. The burning of coal is responsible for 46% of carbon dioxide emissions worldwide and accounts for 72% of total greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector. Air pollution from coal mines is mainly due to emissions of particulate matter and gases, including methane, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides, as well as carbon monoxide. So when we talk about these coal plants, like the one that sits in downtown Colorado Springs, the one that sits in Pueblo, the plume usually affects a 5-mile radius around that coal plant. So our frontline communities that live around those coal plants are suffering. Their health is impacted, their soil is impacted, their water, their air. So the climate impacts of coal are great, especially coal mining. Coal mining is a dirty practice. Next slide. So that's where that brings us to coal mining. Coal mining, that takes a tremendous toll on human health and the environment. You've all heard about black lung from the coal miners, and folks that work in that sector tend to end up very sick and aren't taken care of by their industry traditionally. So large, very large tracts of forest, mountains, and farmland have been cleared to make way for coal mines. Communities have been forcibly displaced and their lands destroyed. The toll on the physical landscape is awful. One of the most serious impacts of coal mining is acid mine drainage, and that contaminates ground and surface water with heavy metals and toxins exposed by mining. This destroys aquatic ecosystems and water supplies that communities depend on for drinking and agriculture. The toll of this it's really bad. It looks terrible, but also, you know, it just, the whole entire area, the plants, the animals, the bugs, everything in that ecosystem is completely destroyed. Next slide. Okay, so what is HB 19-1261? Well, with the passage of this House bill, Colorado committed to a climate action plan that includes a 90% carbon reduction by 2050. As one of the fastest warming states in the nation, Colorado has a responsibility to prevent the worst effects of a changing climate by setting science-based goals to reduce carbon pollution. House Bill 1261 passed in 2019, and it set economy-wide targets for reducing pollution. But I also want to say this month, an analysis released this month reveals that we're not on track to meet our goals. And if we rely solely on currently planned policies, Colorado will exceed its emission goals by roughly 30 million metric tons of greenhouse gas pollution in 2025 and 46 million metric tons of pollution in 2030. And in that it states that we have to have our statewide goals to reduce the 2025 greenhouse gas emissions by at least 26%, 2030 at least 50%, 2050 emissions by at least 90%. And in our opinion, at 350, that is just not soon enough. 2050, it's way too late. So down farther in section 3, it talks about the Air Quality Control Commission, what they're going to take into account to implement policies and rules to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, including the benefits of, you know, compliance, equitable distribution of those benefits, the cost of compliance, opportunities to incentivize clean energy in transitioning communities, and the potential to enhance the resilience of our communities and the natural resources to climate impacts. But by 2030, 10 of Colorado's 13 coal-fired power plants are slated to close, creating a large reduction in emissions between 19 and 20 million metric tons a year, according to analysis. But this just isn't soon enough. We need earlier closure dates on every coal plant, and the 3 coal plants slated to operate past 2030 need to have their dates moved up to the earliest possible date, especially the Comanche plant. Its closure date is currently set at 2070. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about Comanche coal plant. So as I stated before, it's supposed to keep running until 2070. So basically until the wheels fall off. You can't miss Comanche. It's the largest power plant in Colorado, and it dominates the flat landscape for 40 miles in each direction. Like, you can see it from that far away. I can see it from where I live and work in northeastern Colorado Springs, just as its plume of smoke dominates the sky. But coal is being pushed off the power grid by competition from cheaper, cleaner energy sources, as well as rising public alarm about climate change and state policies meant to reduce the emissions. Nationally, coal supplied just a quarter of the country's electricity last year, down from nearly half in 2010. So that's great. So in this picture, you can see there's the Comanche. I had to put this picture in here because it's extremely ironic to me that there's this massive coal plant, and then there's this gorgeous solar array with our beautiful mountains in the background. So when we talk about the cost of these things, Comanche units is about 3.1 cents per kilowatt hour. And the median price for wind projects is about 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour, and solar came in at 2.95 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a very big discrepancy between those prices. So the argument that your rates will go up, it's just too expensive, there's no battery storage, renewables are it's a pie in the sky. It's actually not a pie in the sky. It's a very real, very tangible solution to burning fossil fuels. And next slide. So again, thank you for listening to all of us tonight, listening to me. Just want to reiterate, our pillars of action are to keep all fossil fuels in the ground and transition to 100% renewables through a just and equitable transition, and not a penny more for dirty energy. And I dropped in my email. You can contact me at volunteer@350colorado.org and visit our website and check out the other campaigns and things that we're working on. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you so much, Amy, and thanks to all of our speakers tonight for a great presentation. Yeah, so if you're like me, you're probably really frustrated to hear about everything Xcel Energy is doing and not doing to provide our electricity. So as we are tonight, this is not only an economic issue, but also a climate issue, a social justice issue, and a public health issue. Thankfully, we have a huge opportunity to change all of this, and we need to build momentum starting now to lead up to a pivotal moment next spring. So Xcel will be filing a new Energy Resource Plan, or ERP. This ERP will detail their plan for which resources they'll utilize to provide electricity to their customers, which make up more than half of Colorado's population. I see this as a huge opportunity to make our voices heard on the issues caused by Xcel's fossil fuel plants and to call on Xcel Energy to rethink what's possible through this plan. Anna and I worked to create a letter to Xcel's leadership with 9 principles that will help to shape our clean energy future. To summarize just a few key points, the letter asks Xcel to retire the maximum amount of coal units that is cost effective, which, as we just learned, is all coal in Colorado, to plan for a fair workforce transition for the employees that work at these plants, and to ensure that the communities with existing fossil fuel infrastructure are involved in the planning and share in the benefits of the transition to clean energy. So you can read the whole letter here. I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat. But if everyone tuned in right now signs, we'll surpass 1,700 signatures. But there's one more really important step that you can take to help us collect even more signatures and get people talking about Xcel. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Liana, one of our Denver Beyond Coal volunteers, to tell you a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Liana, for those of you who weren't there for the intros at the beginning. I've been volunteering with the Beyond Coal team in Denver for about 3 years now. And thank you so much for being here. I hope you learned a little something different from each one of the presenters. And I just want to invite you all to take a pretty easy action and become part of our group that I've been involved with. Usually we like to have these events in person, but obviously safety is our priority right now, so we're having virtual events. And we realize the value in people having personal connections to these issues and understand how it affects them and their lives and their loved ones. So what we are trying to do in lieu of being able to get face-to-face time with people is collect signatures by asking people we know to sign and to have real conversations about coal and how it's affecting them with one another. So we started something great called the Xcel Action Team, and that's designed to help gather signatures by reaching out to family and friends here in Colorado and asking them to sign on. To make things more interesting, because we don't think you need an incentive, but if you would like one, we're making it a bit competitive to see who can collect the most signatures. And the winner will get a $100 gift card to King Soopers, because we figure everyone can use some groceries right about now. It should be a lot of fun. We have a whole month, and basically each member will get everything you need to have meaningful, educated, prepared conversations with people. Ren has prepared a wonderful toolkit for that. And all you have to do is start a dialogue, reach out to family, friends, and gather 25 signatures. And then our goal as a whole team will be to have at least 500 signatures on that Xcel letter. And if you would like to learn more and you would like to get involved, please drop your name in the chat, leave your name and email, or you can send Ren an email offline. I'm also available at any time if you would like to find out more about becoming a volunteer and get involved with the Sierra Club. It's great, it's really meaningful, and it's whatever time commitment you have, but we would love to get more people involved. So that is your last call to action, is please help us collect signatures.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liana. Yeah, so we just got started on our action team work this week. So yeah, like Liana said, just go ahead and drop your name and an email or phone number in the chat. You can also make sure that that chat comes just to me if you don't want to share that information with everybody on this call. And I will reach out to give you more information and the toolkit that Liana mentioned to help you get started collecting some signatures. Or you can go ahead and shoot me an email at ren.smith@sierraclub.com, which is also in the chat. Cool, and I'm seeing a couple people opting in already, so thank you so much. I'm so excited to reach out to you guys and start working with you. Cool. So I think without further ado, we can go ahead and take some questions. So yeah, feel free to add more questions if you haven't already in the questions pane, and we'll get to as many as possible. Let's see. Okay, first question I was able to find. For clarification, does HB 1261 call for all climate pollution to be reduced, or just of the electricity sector?
It's focused a lot on the electricity sector, but also on the transportation sector. It's a super long bill, and I read it once and right after it passed. So I haven't like dove into those specific strats. But you know, it is focused on emissions, and the Air Quality Control Commission is in the middle of their rulemaking right now, and we are a party to that rulemaking. So we have a whole team of folks working to help them come up with the right rules based on that legislation.
And just to add to that about how broad this rulemaking is, so 1261 mandates that the state reduce carbon emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions rather, economy-wide by 50% by 2030. So it does include all the sectors, including electricity and transportation, like Amy said. Those are the big ones, right? That's where we get a lot of our emissions from. But in Colorado, we also get over 20% of our emissions from buildings too, because our buildings with dirty gas instead of with clean energy, which is now an option thanks to cheaper and cheaper technology. And so, you know, between electricity sector, transportation sector, and building sector, we could cut a huge chunk of our emissions. But there's also lots of other places and sectors that our emissions come from, like coal mining is counted as its own sector, and a handful of others. And the Air Quality Control Commission has, and actually the Colorado Energy Office has a website dedicated to this process that folks could check out. And it would just be a quick Google of Colorado Energy Office, House Bill 1261 implementation.
Awesome. Unless anybody has anything else to add, I think I'm seeing another question in the chat. It says, do these savings to customers reflect the cost to write off the plants? I think that's in reference to securitization. So maybe Anna, you can help take that one.
So the question is, do these so savings overall account for the cost to write off the plant on Xcel's behalf?
Yeah.
So two ways to answer that question based on the data that I shared. So the main report that we were talking about tonight was that Strategy report. And we looked at, right, the cost of operating coal plants and maintaining them and fueling them compared to just the cost of replacing them with wind and solar. So that doesn't account for anything fancy at all. That is just a super thick equivalent, we call it an equivalent resource comparison of one form of energy to another. And so it doesn't include the cost to write off the coal plants. Once we start to talk about securitization, then we're starting to talk about how much it's going to cost for Xcel to actually retire these coal plants early. Are they still going to be paying off that debt for a long time? The answer is probably yes in some shape or form, but through tools like securitization, we can push certain outcomes there, right? So how long are they paying off that debt? How much is that debt actually? Are they refinancing it so there's savings for the utility and for the customers, or are there not? And so those are all things to be worked out. I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation at the Public Utilities Commission once Xcel starts its electric resource planning next year. And it's certainly something that should be a part of the conversation because, you know, there's a little bit of dynamic here of course, we want the customer savings associated with securitization, but at the same time, for coal plants like Comanche 3, that coal plant was a mistake to build. It was built in 2010. That's why it's not retiring until 2070. And so we're going to probably have to have a hard conversation at the Public Utilities Commission about what we as payers are actually going to have to pay for on that coal plant. And I'm proud to say that Sierra Club, along with other organizations that engage in Xcel Energy's last rate case, such as Clean Energy Action, we helped to avoid $11.7 million in maintenance costs that Xcel was trying to put on customers like you and me. And we said, no, that was a brand new plant. We shouldn't have to be paying for $11.7 million of these updates to the plant just a couple of years after it was built. So again, there's not a perfect way to answer that question. It depends on what kind of data you're looking at and what venue the conversation is happening in, probably the Public Utilities Commission. But we're definitely going to have some meaningful conversations about it over the next couple of years, assuming Xcel decides to work with us and retire those coal plants early. I hope that answers the question.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. Great. And then there's more questions, but real quick, not quite a question, but I do want to lift up, I'm seeing a couple people in the questions pane mention the terrible irony of all of these coal plants being named after Native American tribes. And I see that. And that was one of the first things that really stuck out to me when I was doing this work. Like that's really awful. And I truly hope that we can do better moving forward. So yeah, and then I'm seeing another question. Maybe Jamie can answer this one. How many megawatts is your solar array in Pueblo? Do you know?
It's 156 megawatts.
156.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, another related question, I guess, is what's the output? So yeah, 156 megawatts. Yeah, This is a little bit general, so I'm not really sure who's the best person to answer this one, but any speakers are welcome to chime in on reasons why it's taking so long to switch over to renewable energy. Which I hear, yeah, same. I ask myself that question all the time.
I can start. We could probably answer this question for a really, really, really long time, but I'll throw out a few that are on the top of my mind based on what I worked on today. And I'm sure Amy and Jamie and others can add in. So, you know, depending on the utility, there's definitely different barriers in place hiring coal and replacing with clean energy. And so what I mean by depending on the utility, it's what type of utility. So if it's a municipal utility like Colorado Springs Utilities or Platte River Power Authority, they have different financial mechanisms they can use. They have different planning processes under which coal retirements can be announced, et cetera. If you have an investor utility like Xcel, a lot of it's happening probably through like regulation and some other regulatory venues. And then the other kind of utility that we have in Colorado is electric co-ops. We have a handful of electric co-ops in Colorado, and actually most of generation and transmission co-ops are in Colorado. They have 18 of them, and they have their own particular hurdles. But some of the things that kind of thread all those together, I would say, so one of them is definitely this coal debt. So that's where the securitization conversation comes in, right? So for a coal plant like Comanche, and don't quote me on this, but I think I remember that Comanche still has $880 million of debt that's not paid off and is planned to be paid off between now and 2070. That's a lot of money, and having that much debt impacts the amount of capital that a utility has access to in order to build renewable energy. So just the money issues can be complicated, but there are savings associated with clean energy now. And that's a reality that has changed rapidly in Colorado since about 2018, when we started to see those numbers that Amy shared earlier, where wind is 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour, for example, compared to coal, which is usually above 3. And so that's definitely helping, right? It's helping to make the case for why it is a sound investment to replace these coal plants with clean energy. Another thing that is definitely in the way, and I don't even know if I need to say this out loud, coal is a very politicized topic, right? There is pro-coal dogma that is deeply entrenched into more conservative parts of our state, into parts of the Republican Party, and definitely into rural parts of our country. And so there's a lot of work to do to overcome some of the false narratives that I think take place in a lot of these places about coal being the cheapest and renewable energy being too expensive. And thankfully, we do have the energy economy supporting us on that now. You know, we can just literally look at the numbers and it calculates out. And so that's changing, but that's definitely been a hurdle for a really long time. And then the last thing that I'll add is grid planning is definitely, it's not a hurdle, but it's definitely a challenge in this ongoing process. So for example, we can use Colorado Springs Utilities as an example. I mentioned that Drake coal plant that Amy and I worked really hard on to retire this year. And that coal plant I mentioned was the last downtown coal plant in the state. And so as you can imagine, that whole community's grid, so like the way they're getting the electricity to each of the houses, is planned out around that coal plant that's in the center of downtown. So once the coal plant stops burning coal, you have to have some kind of grid or transmission system in place to get renewable energy that's not just coming from downtown, right? You're going to have wind turbines over here, solar panels over here, probably more of those in other places. And it takes a while to build that out. In Colorado Springs Utilities case, you know, I think they started their transmission study for that. Amy, I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but I think it was probably about years ago they started the conversation about that transmission planning, and it's not going to be done until 2023. And so, you know, that's 5 years since they, you know, started thinking about the idea that, okay, like, we're probably going to get rid of this coal plant eventually. We're not going to announce it yet, but it probably needs to go. So let's start planning around it. So that's definitely also a hurdle. And so when we start to talk about carbon emission reductions goals that the state has by 2025 and 2030, that's why we need to start planning for these things now, because it's going to take a while to build. Hopefully that starts to answer the question. I don't know if folks have other things to add.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. Just a couple more questions that I'm able to find in the chat. So please do reach out to me by email if you have other questions. There are a lot of messages in the chat, so I'm so sorry if I did miss anything. I'm not ignoring you, I promise. But two more questions, and I'll say them together because one should be pretty quick to answer. And the first one is, where is the Pawnee coal plant located? And then secondly, a question about whether all of the coal that's mined in Colorado is used in Colorado power plants, or if some of it goes out of state.
Pawnee is located in Fort Morgan. And no, not all the coal that we use in Colorado goes to Colorado coal plants. A lot of it comes from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming, and we do export a significant amount of our coal. But coal mining, along with the coal industry, will slowly decline as demand for products becomes unsustainable. It's just too expensive to mine it.
Yeah, actually, I'll go back to the map to paint this picture for the question asker there. So number 1 and 2, oh, sorry, no. Yeah, number 1 and 2, no, that's wrong too. So the Trapper mine and the Kalawayo mine. So number 2 and 3 up here. Those, as well as the Trapper mine, so it's 3 actually. Those are, we call them mine to mouth mines. So those mines go directly to these coal plants, these red guys right here. And so those are the only mines in Colorado that feed a power plant in Colorado, as far as I know. And then, yeah, Amy nailed it. The rest of it comes from Powder River Basin. And then a lot of these other coal mines actually end up getting exported to as far as Mexico. So some of it goes into New Mexico and then further.
Great. Cool. Yeah, well, thanks so much, y'all, for answering those questions. And then, Anna, if you can go back down to the last slide, there was just like one more thing that I want to share with y'all before we go. Cool. So yeah, I do just want to take a second to acknowledge that my work at Sierra Club is just one part of a much larger movement building up right now to influence Xcel Energy Colorado to decarbonize more rapidly. So another example is the Xcel is Dirty campaign put together by some other local activists. So they'll be kicking off their work this coming Monday, and anyone interested in more opportunities to put some grassroots pressure on Xcel should definitely check them out. So you can look up Xcel is Dirty on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and email xcelisdirty@gmail.com to learn more about what you can do to help. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today and for submitting questions. Like I said, if you have any other additional questions, please, or if you'd like to speak to any of the speakers individually, you can please contact me. I'll go ahead and put my phone number and email in the chat one more time. Here, give me just 2 seconds to drop that. Great. So yeah, ren.smith@sierraclub.org. Just one more time. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us tonight. Yeah, it was great to see you.
Thanks, y'all.